אני רק אציג, אני חושבת שלא צריך להציג אותך כבר, את פרופסור שלמה יזרעאל מאוניברסיטת תל אביב, professeur éméritus. Je vais juste présenter quelqu'un qui n'a pas besoin d'être présenté, monsieur le professeur émérite Shlomo Izre'el de l'Université de Tel Aviv. אני יורדת מהבמה כי הוא עושה כל מיני דברים נורא יפים שגם אני רוצה לראות. אז אני מכיר. אז בבקשה.
תודה, תודה שבאתם, תודה על ההזמנה. שאלו אותי מה ההרצאה תהיה. I've been asked just before if my talk will be in French. I said no, in spite of the title, which you will understand later why. Thank you, Il. Thank you, Masha, for inviting me for this conference. What you see on the left-hand side below is a special font which will be explained in the next screen. This is the fourth chapter of the new Chok HaLeom nation law that was just came to life, unfortunately, in the state of Israel. And I will read it to you in English for those who do not understand the Hebrew very well. A. The state's language is Hebrew. B. The Arabic language has a special status in the state. Regulating the use of Arabic in state institutions or by them will be set in law. C. This clause does not harm the status given to the Arabic language before this law came into effect. There's a built-in contradiction here. People have discussed this time and again, but the only thing here in Paris, here in France, that I should say is repeat the Honorable Émile Zola, j'accuse. And now for our talk here today. Those of you who have managed to look at the abstract, saw that I promised to answer this question. Why do Israelis look at me with either amazement or fear when I tell them that I am a linguist? In Hebrew, it is balshan. Now, in amazement, because they do not understand the term balshan, they think it is balash. Balash is, and they ask me, are you a police detective? אתה עובד במשטרה, או שאתה בלשן פרטי? The knowledgeable would look at me in fear because they think I'm intimidating balshan. And they say to me, oh dear, oh my, I should not open my mouth because I'm speaking with mistakes. And you are a linguist, I can afford it to myself. Well, we'll see about that. How well do we speak? In the next series of 3 questions, please try to answer them for yourselves. Questions on language attitude extracted from a sociolinguistic questionnaire designed for the informants of the corpus of spoken Israeli Hebrew, croisée, which we will reach later. 1. Please try to figure out for yourself. How would you evaluate your level of reading Hebrew? I don't read Hebrew, low level, intermediate level, high level. How would you evaluate your level of writing Hebrew? I don't write Hebrew, low level, intermediate level, and high level. And on a 5-level scale, how would you evaluate the Hebrew you speak, where level 1 is the highest and level 5 is the lowest? Try to think about it. Let's first see the answer by a native speaker of Arabic who has been speaking Hebrew since the age of 10 and whose main language of interaction has always been Arabic. For the first question, how would you evaluate your reading of Hebrew? Intermediate level. Writing Hebrew? Intermediate level. What about speaking Hebrew? Very good. So she speaks better than writing or reading, obviously so. Now let's see the answers by a native speaker of Hebrew, who has been speaking Hebrew all her life and whose parents had Hebrew as their main speaking language. Reading Hebrew, highest. Writing Hebrew, highest. Speaking Hebrew, intermediate. And she is a doctoral student, mind you. So why do we believe that our language is full of mistake? I shouldn't repeat this because this has been done very well by my predecessors, but you all know the history of Hebrew. Let's see about that. Hebrew used as a scholastic language, as a lingua franca. This was very important of you to have said it, among Jews all over the world, mainly in the written medium, but also in the spoken medium. During the first Aliyah in the 1880s and the early beginnings of the Hebrew vernacular that we speak today, the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, and today Israeli Hebrew has now been a fully fledged language for over a century. Let's see the percentage or the ratio of Hebrew speakers as the only or principal language among Jews, only Jews, since 1882, more or less the beginning of the first Aliyah. I won't repeat this, but please take a look at the percentages between 0 at the very beginnings of the Aliyah to 77%, 46%, depending on Aliyot, on immigration waves. And please note, which also connects us to the Chok HaLe'om, that even after the huge waves of immigration in the 1990s, the Statistics Bureau of Israel didn't bother even to ask this question. Why? Because it was obvious that Hebrew is the language of the state of Israel. But let's see what's the sociolinguistic setting today. We have about 3/4 of Jews living in Israel, about 25% of non-Jews. Among the Jews, we have natives about 75%, non-native 25%. So the total native speakers ratio to native speakers is about 1:1. So we are still an immigrant absorbing country, and this is reflected by the sociolinguistic situation, of course. So spoken Hebrew during its emergence and its formative stages, Agnon, in one of his letters to his wife in Germany, who was living in Berlin at the time, in 1925, wrote to her, the entire nation speaks Hebrew. But our national poet, Chaim Nachman Bialik, was caught one day by the Gdud Maginei HaSafa, the Hebrew language brigade, in the 1930s, speaking in the street with his colleague and friend Ravnitsky in Yiddish. And it is well known that Bialik said, Yiddish is self-spoken. You don't have to think about it. Hebrew, one must speak. You have to fight to speak Hebrew. And one of the most wonderful linguists of the beginning of the 20th century, Eliezer Meir Lipschitz, wrote, published already in 1914. Our inner language is not Hebrew, but foreign jargonic. This truth has to be said, although it is not pleasant. The inner form of the words is foreign and the syntax is foreign. The foreign influence comes from remote languages, most of them Indo-European. The influence of the jargons is not to be lost with children and children of children, since the children will have learned the foreign syntactical features within the Hebrew of their parents. And in 1920, he published as follows, the colloquial language is now rooted in an inner language, that is, as he called it, foreign jargonic, mixed language, or whatever. That's his perception, of course. Ephraim Kishon wrote in the 1950s, "This is a land where mothers learn the mother tongue from their children." Of course, we all know that. And Abba ben David, who was very influential in directing the radio Hebrew speaking, wrote in 1967, "Our country is all a large ulpan, no more nor less, in the middle of the academic session. Both the newcomer and the immigrant camp and our best writers, even our best writers, live in an ulpan. Most Hebrew speakers, even though they use it, they still do not want it as is. They do not want it as it is spoken now," says he. Chaim Blanc was, with Chaim Rosen, one of the two real linguists, and I should recall Weimann, who actually wrote and published the first decent, to me, Hebrew grammar in 1950, wrote in the 50s as follows. "Most of this composing, what might be called the dominant prestige group, that is scholars, writers, public figures, have until recently, 1954, been non-natives. Their attitudes regarding Hebrew are accepted almost as a matter of course by many natives, especially those having had the benefit of education, who maintain it does not matter that I am a native and the grammarians are not. They know the language, while, should have written here, while I do not. And what I speak is full of mistake." He writes in another paper, "Our language is being renovated in an unusual pace and very special circumstances. And it is worthy that linguists turn at least some of their energy to studying this development and explain it, even if they are forced to abandon the chase of errors and corruptions, and even to admit here and there that a certain mistake is not a mistake anymore, but an innovation that linguistic life has introduced and made it rooted." And then he continues, "Today," again 1950s, "today the situation of an educated person who speaks Hebrew is difficult, since too often he is being reminded by his teachers, parents, or just any expert, Yod'ei Davar, that his language is corrupt and that he has to say, for instance, hechalav instead of hachalav, eini yodea instead of ani lo yodea, and so on and so forth." And the Language Committee has published in 1911, its first publication, a brochure, 8 pages, Al Tomar Emor, don't say, say. Don't say koev li harosh, say roshi koev. Don't say לקחו לי את, say לקחו ממני את. Don't say אין לו את הדבר הזה, say אין לו הדבר הזה. Don't say לי אין, in a posal form, בהפסק, say לי אין. אני צריך את הדבר הזה, is forbidden, אני צריך לדבר הזה. You should say, or הדבר הזה צריך לי. None of this is standard Hebrew today, and nobody notices. So it looks as if by 1911 the Language Committee has already had a language standard that one should strive for. So we should now ask ourselves what a standard language is. Standard language involves the process of standardization. Einar Haugen, American Norwegian of Norwegian origin scholar, wrote in a really seminal paper, Dialect, Language, Nation, in 1966 as follows. The 4 aspects of language development, and try to think of Hebrew when you read it. that we have now isolated as crucial features in taking the step from dialect to language. He was interested in language or nation. From vernacular to standard are as follows. 1, selection of a norm out of dialects, codification of form, elaboration of function, and acceptance by the community. That's not really important, but neither codification nor elaboration is likely to proceed very far unless the community can agree on the selection of some kind of a model from which the norm can be derived. And much, much later, Hudson, in his book on sociolinguistics, accepts all this and explains what a selection is as follows. A particular variety must have been selected as the one to be developed into a standard language. It may be an existing variety, but it could be an amalgam of various varieties. However, in some cases, the chosen variety has been one with no native speakers at all. For instance, classical Hebrew in Israel. Note this, classical Hebrew in Israel. What is classical Hebrew? I don't know. Definitely not what Hudson thinks of classical Hebrew. Was classical Hebrew a late 19th century standard? This is a wonderful book. Hebräische Konversationsgrammatik, Conversational Grammar of Hebrew, published probably, there's no year there, by Yitzhak Rosenberg, who was an eminent Semitic linguist, probably in 1898, and he had visited Palestine and Mikveh Israel before he writes it. So let's listen to a small portion of Sicha ben הרופא והחולה, conversation between the doctor and the patient. רופא, איזה כאב יחוש? חולה, אדוני הרופא, ראשי סובב הולך וכל עצמותיי תרעדנה. לא אוכל לעמוד על רגליי. נחלתי במחלת העצבים, גרוני יכאב לי, ליבי יקה בקרבי בלי הרף כהולם פעם. Was this the standard Hebrew of the late 19th century? Definitely not. Something close to classical Hebrew, maybe, but of course not. Perhaps as an early 20th century standard. This is a wonderful book also by David Yelin, you know the name, of course, an eminent member of the Vaad HaLashon, Hebrew Language Committee. Tarsag, 1903, Sefer HaTalmid, or Sefer HaMoreh, and Tafrei Samach Vav, 1906, Sefer HaTalmid, or vice versa, I don't remember right now. Let's see. From Sefer HaMoreh. הנה הלוז מתגלגל. הנה התגלגל הלוז ויפול ארצה. So the teachers spoke like this. את חצי הלוז לקחתי ואוכל. I wonder why he didn't write ואוכל, but that's another matter. So, שלמה, מי אכל את לב הלוז? יצחק אכל את לב הלוז. That's fine. But all the other are chunks of the Haskalah Hebrew, of classical Hebrew of the time. But we have good evidence from David Naiman. I hope I write his name correctly. I found it only Nun Yud or Nun Yud Yud Mem Nun. He wrote about the memories of his father, Mordechai Naiman. The teacher himself stutters more than he speaks, because he too was not used to speak Hebrew since his childhood, and outside school he would need to speak in a human language, in Lashon Bnei Adam, that is not Hebrew. And Achad Ha'am, whoever hears how teachers and students alike stutter due to lack of words and expressions, immediately feels that this speech cannot evoke neither in the heart of the speaker nor of that of the hearer a feeling of respect and love to the reduced language. And the child's soft mind, who studies along with Hebrew, also French, mind you, will feel even more strongly the artificial chains which the Hebrew language puts on him. So a standard at the beginning of the 19th century. Let's see. Mordechai Ben Asher, Hitgabshut, Crystallization of the Normative Grammar, a book from 1969. The Language Committee treated grammatical questions and the correction of grammatical errors for the first time in the winter of 1911. We saw part of this work. We have only meager attestation that anyone was busy with setting up a grammatical norm. The decisions and the preferences of the grammarians, listen to this, reflect to a large degree subjective motivations, personal. And our friend here, Yair O, will conclude this conference in his wonderful book, Borim Signon Ledor, who wrote on the Language Committee, and he will speak on the Language Academy, a continuation of this, published 2 years ago. The Language Committee felt the need, they did feel the need, for a new grammar that is standard. That is my interpretation, but never accomplished one. Why then an agreed modern grammar book was not composed by the Language Committee? And in fact, which is much more important, why hasn't such a book composed until these very days? Will you speak about it? Good. So let's go to standard languages with all this background and language standards again. Two authorities in sociolinguistics, in the fourth edition of their book, Authority in Language, on English, write as follows. Standardization is motivated in the first place by various social, political, and commercial needs, and is promoted in various ways. But absolute standardization of a spoken language is never achieved. The only fully standardized language is a dead language, of course. Therefore, it seems appropriate to speak more abstractly of standardization as an ideology, and a standard language as an idea in the mind rather than a reality, a set of abstract norms to which actual usage may conform to a greater or lesser extent. And just 5 years ago, Andrew Lean, in his chapter, which is titled Vernaculars and the Idea of a Standard Language, writes, of course, after Milroy and Milroy, writes, the key word in the title of this chapter is idea. And he continues, towards the end of this chapter, one might suggest that once people started to plan languages, that was the point at which it all started to go wrong, imposing a pressure on peoples and on languages, pressures which in earlier times were seen by those who promulgated them as social benefits, but which now, in our more ecologically minded times, we would regard as social ills. Standards are not simply enshrined in formal books and pronouncements, but they are also loom large in the population imagination. Consequently, when the standard appears to be slipping, this can be a cause of anxiety and concern. We have already listened to that. Doimert sees standard language as zombies, the living dead, no longer real, but nonetheless haunting the minds of speakers, and those linguists who believe in languages as unitary, well-defined, and countable objects. We will object to it later. While standards continue to haunt both language users and gatekeepers of languages, they are real enough, and it is too soon to kill them off. How, anyway, do you go about killing something that is already dead? This is wonderful, I think. So alive, kicking, and haunting indeed, not Hebrew. Robert Hall, Leave your language alone. This is how he entitled his book of 1950 in America. On other points, some people are likely to raise objections on what they hear or see, but disapprove of. Then they tell us we must not say it one way, we must say in another, their way, because what we've just said is bad, wrong, incorrect, ungrammatical, uneducated, ignorant, or something else equally uncomplimentary. The result is we are confused and insecure. We develop conflicts within ourselves on such points and, in the end, no longer know what we should say. And there is the title of our talk today here, Fautes de grammaire ou grammaire de faute. This is based on a wonderful book by Henri Frey here in France, La grammaire de faute, the grammar of mistakes, 1929. And he opens it with a letter to his readers. À mon lecteur, cher lecteur, adoptant l'état d'esprit de l'observateur qui se refuse à corriger ce qui est, je me suis penché sur la vie des signes avec le seul souci de l'objectivité pour rechercher en quoi les fautes sont conditionnées par le fonctionnement du langage et comment elles le reflètent. Car il est bien improbable, cher lecteur, que vous fassiez des fautes pour le simple plaisir d'être incorrect. J'aimerais contribuer, par ma façon de regarder et de formuler les problèmes, à vous rendre moins rébarbatif des matières dont la tradition a su faire une des plus tristes disciplines, c'est la linguistique. Et comme je serais heureux si mon livre, pauvre lecteur, lassé des rabâchages de la grammaire traditionnelle, réussissait à vous communiquer un peu de cet intérêt et de cette sympathie que réclame l'étude intelligente des choses du langage. Henri Frey, 1929. And in a modern edition, just published first in 2007 and then in 2011, the linguist, French, probably of Greek origin, Frédéricos Valetopoulos, wrote in the preface to this book, l'auteur traite de questions linguistiques rompant avec la tradition qui voulait que les fautes soient des pathologies du langage. Henri Frey redéfinit le rapport entre le langage et la faute. Celle-ci remplit une fonction dans la langue, elle prévient et répare un déficit du langage correct. You can agree with it or not, but it's very nice. Certaines questions semblent très actuelles, ou même elles nous permettent de suivre comment certaines fautes sont devenues aujourd'hui la norme. You have seen it in Hebrew earlier, right? So let's return to Semitic languages. This book, ein Beitrag zum Problem des Entstehung der Sprache, to the development of language, took as its motto the following: Der Irrtum ist das fruchtbare Prinzip der Sprache. The error is the fruitful principle of language. You know who Harry Torchiner is? Tursinai, the first president of the Hebrew Language Academy and previously the president of the Language Committee. And he wrote it published it in 1916. Still, 102 years later. Have you seen this? Just less than 2 months ago. If I'm not mistaken, the 17th of July, 2018. The Academy of Hebrew posted this in their Twitter. What is the Hebrew language mistakes that drives you out of your mind? Echo? I have no idea what it means. Hadhidu. And thanks a lot in advance to all Hebrew lovers and frequent error defeaters. Look at the mistakes. Look at the picture that they chose. You know it. It is Scream by Edvard Munch. Listen to what Edvard Munch wrote on it. I was walking along the road with two friends. The sun was setting. Suddenly the sky turned blood red. I paused feeling exhausted and leaned on the fence. There was blood and tongues of fire above and blue-black fjord. The cynicism is, of course, to the left-hand side, not to the right-hand side. Fire above the blue-black fjord and the city. My friends walked on and I stood there trembling with anxiety, and I sensed an infinite scream passing through nature, which is echoing with the Academy of Hebrew Language Against Mistake today in the Twitter. I wonder if they really feel like this. Probably yes. So where do we stand now? Hebrew, in spite of its special history, is not really different from other languages, probably Western languages more than others, in striving for a linguistic standard. The Hebrew linguistic community is thus not special in the inferiority feelings of its speakers and the behavior of both official and unofficial authorities. Now, do we really speak faulty language? Well, you know my response, but let's prove it.
מצוין. שככה המחירים ירדו. שיהיה תחרות.
Come on, teachers of Hebrew, correct me.
מה זה אמר לו על זה? ממתי אתה קונה של קרמל?
זה מי הביא? זה החבר'ה, ביום שעבר.
יש לי עוד מעט את היינות של השי, הברקן האלו.
No offense for Barkan, but יהיה את העיינות, שיהיה תחרות. Wrong? Definitely. Right? Well, God himself wrote this way. ויהי לפנינה ילדים ולחנה אין ילדים. ויהי השמש באה ועלתה היה. You always teach your biblical Hebrew students that, well, at the beginning, like Arabic, okay, that's fine. ויהי, that's okay. But ועלתה היה. ונחלה לא יהיה לו. ואיש את קודשיו. את קודשיו. Wow. I still remember when I was a student. The only thing that I remember from my biblical Aramaic class is that I stood up at the request of the teacher. I won't mention his name. And the only thing that he corrected me was that I spoke with haya et. Or yesh et, or whatever.
מה קרה? הרווחתי הוצאתי. הרווחתי, נכון?
Now the most prominent authority of Hebrew linguistics among laymen is Ruvi Rosenthal, right? Yeah. He writes a few years ago about hervachti, hefsadati, instead of hirvachti or hifsadati. A relatively new mistake in the domain of the verb is the pronunciation of the hif'il stem in the past tense, in which the chirek has been changed to segol, as in hef'alti, heshlamti, etc. This corruption has been made into a widespread spoken norm. So it's a norm, isn't it? And can be heard also in the media. One can explain any such mistake in terms of phonetic convenience, analogy, or the like. Obviously so. Those who know Arabic knows very well that this is standard, in standard Arabic, in Fusha, right? But the penetration of a prominent deviation from a grammatical norm exposes an inferior linguistic subcultures. So everybody but Ruvi Rosenthal is inferior. Well, but these influences. Should I read you the biblical forms? Hegla, hefda, hechlamnu. Why not? It's written everywhere. Mistake or not? I don't know. So why are we still being harassed about language? Because we are all, like Frey's pauvre lecteur, are condemned to the brainwashing of traditional grammar. Can we overcome preconceptions? Yes, we can. Let us try to look at language differently, so that we won't see and hear phantom mistakes all over. The key phrase is linguistic variation. Language is dynamic. You mentioned it before, I liked it a lot. Language changes over time. We all know that. Language changes in speech and in writing, among speakers and according to circumstances. This is the most important thing. Variation is an inherent feature of language. You just cannot treat it as unitary. Language use is not random. It is regulated by demographic factors and contextual settings. So we have past varieties and contemporary varieties, and they influence each other. We have spoken varieties and written varieties influencing each other all the time. And we have, on a continuum, on one extreme, we have natural, spontaneous, colloquial, linguistic exchange. And on the other continuum, if you like, we have belles lettres and poetry. Right? And there is a continuum. You cannot just split it into lects or whatever. Spoken varieties goes from everyday talk to reading of poetry aloud from books. Written varieties goes from, only recently I added this, from chatting, Twitter, whatever, and this is written, this is not spoken language, to, of course, reading or writing. Now we have two chunks that I was happy to be able to find on the internet. Well, one is from the Croisée, the Corpus of Spoken Hebrew, and the other, the written one, on the same topic. Listen to this.
אני רוצה גם לעשות כאלו דברים. זה קשה?
מה זה?
פריסת נייר. מה, מרחת אותם?
אבל יש עציץ בפנים.
כן. איך את עושה? פשוט מורחת על העיתון דבק?
לא, שם את הקערה המערבבת, גוזרת העיתון קורעת, אבל כשיהיה ארוכים, 40.
ואז את מדביקה כזה, מפסלת?
אני קודם שמה, מטפטפת נייר כדי שיהיה לזה רוחב, עומק כאילו, אני מדביקה קודם קצוצים של נייר כאילו, ואז זה מסוף.
Standard spoken Hebrew colloquial everyday language. I won't read it to you, I just will point out two kivchuchim shel niyar. I don't know if it's her innovation or what had been existing before, and written kimtutei niyar. Why not? Mistake? No, just variation. But we'll come back to it, we're there. Sheyeh arukim merubayim. We'll come back to it. I claim that language education should acknowledge linguistic variation and shed light on written and spoken varieties alike. Because language is a tool of expression and communication. Its most frequent manifestation is human communication. Spoken language varieties, notably the language of everyday conversation, are the most frequent of all linguistic systems. It is this capacity of spoken language that lends it the power to have its impact on all other linguistic systems and their development. Therefore, proper linguistic attention must be drawn to spoken language. Spoken language must be analyzed according to its own properties. We must detach ourselves from any preconceptions about the structure of language based on its written forms, or non-existing models, of course. How this can be done? obviously by listening to daily speech and by studying its linguistic characteristics. However, speech is ephemeral. So what do? We need a database, a corpus of recorded speech as well as a transcript that will enable us to analyze the linguistic and other features of the spoken language. And I mentioned kozi, or ma'amad in Hebrew, the spoken corpus spoken of Hebrew, which has the following features. It's a recordings of real-life speech, mostly conversation. You've heard some chunks of it. This is a photograph of one of our informants, and he wears stereo wonderful pair of microphones on his neck, goes everywhere for 24 hours or 48 hours and recording everything. And this how it was done. And this was recorded between August 2000 and October 2002. Of course, this is already a historical corpus, but still we can find some interest in it. I won't read you the features now, but it's about the final end is that you can go to the website of COSI, read everything. Altogether, we have about 13 and a half hours of recorded text, about 5 hours and 15 minutes, which is a small corpus, but a fine one, I think, presented in Elan, which I'll show you in a moment. Sound and transcripts aligned and segmented into prosodic unit, because prosody or intonation is a very important feature. You can read the name of our friend Yatziv Malibert, who worked on the Corpus Afroas, a corpus of Afro-Asiatic languages, which used one large part of this corpus, one informant, a large piece, 20 minutes, a little bit over 20 minutes, and transcribed it into phonemic with other notations. And it is also represented, you can read it in the website. And I would mention that COSI is the only, COSI in Italian, because COSI means in Italian this is how we should make a corpus, is the only spoken Hebrew corpus of its kind that is freely available on the internet, and you can go to COSI.com and read everything for yourself and use it. Please do. So in the final part of my talk, I hope I can finish it quickly. How can a corpus contribute to linguistic analysis? I will quote from John Sinclair, one of the fathers of corpus linguistics. To me, he said, he wrote, a corpus of any size signals a flashing neon sign, think again, think again, think again. And I find it extremely difficult, this is very nice, to fit corpus evidence into received receptacles. And then we should use the method of corpus-driven approach, established earlier but developed by Elena Tonini Bonelli, which means in French, as our good friend and teacher said, Claire Blanche Benveniste and Colette Jean-Jean, about the French corpus, of course, so translate it into any language. Il ne s'agit pas d'utiliser le français parlé pour illustrer une théorie, which is the corpus-based approach, mais de trouver une théorie qui permette d'aborder les données du français ou hébreu, of course, parlé. So you must base your theory on data. An example, presentative existential sentences. Listen to this, we've already dealt with it.
היה כבר כמה פירות.
היה כבר כמה פירות. This is interesting. יהיה לך בעיות. It will be interesting in a moment. And I remind you that this is not mistaken classical Hebrew at all. I took it from TV just a few weeks ago. Look at the subtitle, The Delight of Subtitled Writer, Prescribed Language. S.T. Borochovsky wrote about it.
והוא אומר, רק אני אעשה לך את זה, רק אני אעשה לך את זה, אם לא יהיה לך בעיות, תסתבכי איתי.
Natural Hebrew, isn't it? Subtitle, רק אני אעשה לך את זה, אם לא, יהיו לך בעיות. Correction, but she said,
יהיה לך בעיות.
יהיה לך בעיות. Why correct? It's always been done. In numbers, anyway. So we take the software Elan and write Haya. If we write Haya and we push search, we get a concordance of all occurrences of this string or word or whatever you choose. And you can push, for example, שיהיה תחרות, as you see, and you go into the text, into the software, into the file. And when you push this, you listen to it. So this is a wonderful program to work with.
שיהיה תחרות.
שיהיה תחרות. So you can work. This is how I have been working for the past 15 years or so. So a corpus-driven study on this structure will teach us as follows. First, an existential sentence with yesh.
ויש נבחרת שייט.
Listen to this. יש נבחרת שייט. Look at the graph. Where is the peak?
ויש נבחרת שייט.
יש נבחרת שייט. Okay? Now, if we want to say it in the past, listen to this.
היה כבר כמה פירות.
היה כבר כמה פירות. Look at the graph.
היה כבר כמה פירות.
היה כבר כמה פירות. But look at this. Spontaneous colloquial Hebrew. Not היה כבר כמה פירות, but or whatever. הייתה השקעה נוספת. With agreement. הייתה. Not היה השקעה נוספת. Listen to this.
הייתה השקעה נוספת. הייתה השקעה נוספת.
Very different peak. And there is a complementary distribution between form, segmental form, and prosodic intonation form. And there's another thing, the meaning. The first two are news. This is new thing introduced into the discourse. But the last one is old news. He has already mentioned השקעה נוספת before. So there's a complementary distribution and we can learn something from it. That this is also existing in the colloquial language, this form of הייתה השקעה. We don't always say היה השקעה. This is important for the grammar of the language, right? So summing up, marking of focus in presentative existential sentences has a complementary distribution. It is marked by either prosodic accent or a positional pronominal element. That's the hayta, the ta of haya. The latter case is constrained by discourse factors. I've just mentioned it. That namely, a given known or expected pivot. The pivot is the term for the presented noun phrase. השקעה נוספת, for instance. When people write or speak what they think to be the standard language, not colloquial, they use the latter configuration also when the pivot is new. But both contextual and demographic variation of this construction is open to further research. So we can hear both this and this here and there. But this is still open. Okay? So, some final words. Language is not random. It is regulated by demographic factors and contextual settings. Hebrew, like all languages, change. Its recent emergence as a spoken vernacular is a major source for its sociolinguistic situation. However, as in many other languages, language contact is but one of the factors influencing its current linguistic and sociolinguistic structure. As regards inner variation, Hebrew is structured like any other language. The strive for a linguistic standard is doomed to fail if disregarding linguistic variation, which is an inherent feature of language per se. Some people, like my sister-in-law, which I saw yesterday, has the chutzpah to always correct you, even me, even when you speak your ordinary, everyday conversational language, But of course, when I am around, she said, yes, I too make mistakes. When they do so, show them your intimidating character as a real balshan. Thank you. יש לי עוד דקה? There's a wonderful piece that you may enjoy from the Golden Girls in Hebrew. And the acting characters are Shosh, Elchanan, Ruti, and Dalia. Dalia, Ruti, which will be mentioned later as Mrs. Golan, and Shosh share an apartment, all three women. Tonight, they are having Elchanan for dinner. Elchanan is the headmaster of the school in which Ruti Golan is a teacher.
למזוג לך כוס?
מוזגים יין, לא כוס, גברת גולן. את מבינה מה אמרת הרגע?
אני הבנתי, אולי הדבר היחידי שהבנתי הערב. מים?
משפטים מלאים, גברת גולן. מה מים? יש פה מים, ירדו לך מים, שאבתם מים?
שמישהו יטביע לי את הראש בדלי מים.
זה משפט.
נכון.
אתה יודע מה הולך טוב עם האורז? במיה בלימון. בוא, אני אערבב לך קצת. לא נגעת בשום דבר.
שוש בשלנית מצוינת.
בשלנית זה כבר שם תואר המעיד על כישורים בבישול. להגיד מצוינת אחרי בשלנית זה מיותר.
באמת חבל להגיד דברים מיותרים.
סליחה?
חבל שנדבר במקום שנאכל. בתיאבון. בתיאבון.
בתיאבון. מים.
מה? מים? איזה מים? שאבתם מים. ירדו לך מים. למזוג לך מים.
אל תביאי לו מים.
זה מה שאני אומרת.
אני מצטערת, אני הייתי צריכה להזהיר אותך שהאוכל של שוש הרבה יותר חריף מהטוסטים בקפיטריה.
That's it. Time for questions? I don't know. Yes. Okay. Where are your tomatoes or stones or whatever?
Yes. תודה רבה. Merci beaucoup. On a quelques minutes pour des questions. We have 5 minutes for questions. Please read.
But without any mistakes. You know.
Do you believe that the modern society can reach without the basic standards?
There are two things I can answer to you. One, I don't understand what a standard is. Because there is no standard. Nobody has decided upon a standard. As I tried to show, everybody thinks that his language is the standard. But I've also said that education should go both to literary language or high standard, if you like, and colloquial language. And understand that we use both. Which standard? I wish one day we could establish at least a grammar book which will form a model which will be close to some standard of newspaper language, journalistic, of whatever variety of standard language. I really don't know. The issue is that you should not correct your students or pupils or whatever with phrases or forms or whatever that you don't use yourself or that are outdated or that are not existent. Even not in the standard language or even in English. They should speak as they speak because, but I'm not speaking about small children. I'm speaking about growing adults, adolescents, or adults. They change the language. What can you do? But yes, education is very important, of course. on both extremes.
I can add one thing, that the public in Israel strives for a long, and you can see where on the site of the academy, there are many questions. How should we say that or that?
Yes, but because they are brainwashed. What can they do? They are pauvres lecteurs.
We cannot make just one level. We have to, I think so, to make a difference between the high standard of expression and the colloquial, everyday language.
Of course. But the point that I tried to make, and I make it now clear again, is that I'll give you an example. You write a grammar for Olim Chadashim, okay? You write a grammar of Hebrew not for Olim Chadashim, for use for the literary person, for the journalist. It is a model. It is an idea. It is something that can never exist, and it has never existed. There are either exceptions for this norm or variation. Unfortunately, linguistics all over the world cannot yet produce a grammar with variation, with inherent variation. Unfortunately, we are not in a position to do it. I really don't know how to do it. But thank you, this is very important, yes.
Morning.
I agree with most of those things you said. I have just one objection to the very first experiment with the same question meant to Arabic speakers of Arabic and to Hebrew speakers. And when Arabic speakers, if you were a foreign language, being a good speaker of you means making yourself understood.
Of course.
Now for Hebrew speakers, making yourself understood is dodgy, so it's completely different. It's not compatible.
You are absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I could have made it more subtle, but I made the point, and thank you for noting it. You are absolutely right. Thank you.
D'autres questions? So we must train yeah, you're on. No. Yes, we have some more time.
So maybe just one short question about I think you already said that, but basically when you want to base your grammar on spoken language, you know that linguists prefer spoken language for many different reasons. Some of them, of course, but there is no theoretical framework for doing this because most of the concepts and theories come from written language. They come from a very long tradition of working with literary texts. So basically, how do you envision such a presentation of, apart from just charts and statistics?
First of all, it should show examples from real data, not invented ones. And then there is a wonderful book that I didn't cite here by the Swedish linguist Per Linell. Was it 2012 or something? The Written Language Bias in Linguistics. And it has so many points of importance. What's wrong with written bias language in linguistics? How do I envision it? Eventually, it may look the same because it will be a model as well. We cannot come out of our need for a model. But it will look different because it will have different data and different relationship between forms, as I tried to show you the extensions. That's how I envision it. Thank you.